On October 15, 1982, at exactly 4 p.m., a sleek Learjet touched down on a private dirt strip deep in the Colombian jungle. The engines were still screaming when the cabin door swung open, but nobody stepped out. Instead, men in camouflage began throwing heavy duct-taped duffel bags onto the grass. One bag hit a sharp rock and burst open. Thousands of $100 bills flew into the air like green confetti. The pilot didn't even look back. He was sweating. He knew that the weight in the back of his plane was enough to buy a small country. He also knew that if a single Colombian fighter jet appeared on the horizon, he was a dead man. But this didn't start here. To understand why a billionaire was using a $1 million jet like a common garbage truck, you have to understand the math of the Medellin cartel. By the early 80s, Pablo wasn't just selling a product, he was drowning in the profit. Every single day, tons of white powder moved north to the United States, and every single day, mountains of cash had to move south. But there was a problem. A huge problem. The U.S. government was watching the banks. They were watching the wire transfers. Pablo had billions of dollars sitting in stash houses in Miami and Los Angeles. He couldn't touch them. It was just paper until he could get it home. He tried hiding cash in television sets. He tried sewing it into the lining of suitcases. It wasn't enough. The money was growing faster than he could move it. He needed a bigger engine. He needed a Learjet. But that was only the beginning. Before we go deeper, make sure you're subscribed. We post stories like this every single day. Pablo didn't just buy any plane. He bought a high-speed executive jet. These planes were designed for CEOs and movie stars. They were built for luxury. Pablo didn't care about luxury. The moment the jet arrived, his mechanics ripped out the leather seats, they tore out the wood paneling, they stripped the plane until it was just a hollow metal tube. Why? Because weight was the enemy.
$1 million in $20 bills weighs about 100 pounds. Pablo wasn't moving 1 million, he was moving hundreds of millions. He began running a cash express flight. The plane would take off from Florida, loaded to the ceiling with cash. It was so heavy that the tires would bulge on the runway. The risk was insane. If the plane crashed, the evidence would be scattered across the ocean for miles. But Pablo didn't care about the risk. He cared about the ego. He loved the idea of a luxury jet being used for trash. What happened next shocked everyone. The flights were working, the money was flowing into Medellin, but greed always creates a new problem. The pilots were getting nervous. They were flying into illegal strips with no lights and no radar. They were carrying 10 tons of paper that could get them a life sentence, or worse. Pablo realized he couldn't just trust the pilots. He started sending his most dangerous enforcers on the flights. They sat in the cockpit with a gun to the pilot's head. The pressure was rising, the ego was growing, and that's when everything changed. The U.S. customs agents noticed a pattern. A specific Learjet was flying dark routes. It would disappear from radar over the Caribbean and reappear hours later. They began to track the tail number. They were waiting for the right moment to strike. On the final flight, the jet was carrying its biggest load yet, 10 tons of physical currency. It was so much money that the pilot struggled to keep the nose of the plane up. As they crossed the Colombian coast, the radio went dead. The pilot saw 2 shadows in the clouds. They weren't birds, they were interceptor jets. He knew this could destroy everything. There was no way back now. He dove. He took the multi-million-dollar Learjet into a terrifying, steep descent toward the trees. He pushed the engines until they started to vibrate. He was betting his life on the speed of the plane. The chase lasted for 10 minutes. It was a battle of engineering versus physics. The Learjet was faster, but it was too heavy. At the last second, the pilot saw the dirt strip. He slammed the plane onto the ground so hard the landing gear snapped. The jet skidded through the mud, screaming, until it came to a halt just inches from the jungle wall. The cargo was safe. The 10 tons of dollars had arrived, but he had no idea what was coming. The cash jet had become too famous. The U.S. government used the evidence from that flight to start Operation Swordfish. They began seizing the cartel's bank accounts and tracking their pilots.
Pablo won the flight, but he lost the secret. The Learjet was eventually found abandoned and rusting in the jungle. It was a hollow shell of a plane that once carried more wealth than most banks. In the end, Pablo Escobar learned that you can buy a jet and you can buy a pilot, but you can never buy a way to outrun the consequences. The jet was a symbol of his power. In the end, it was just another piece of evidence. By mid-1983, the Learjet strategy had to be abandoned. The sky was no longer a safe place for a billionaire's pocket change. Every airfield was watched. Every tail number was logged. The very tool Pablo used to move his wealth had become the tool the government used to find him. The pilot of that final flight disappeared. Some say he was paid off. Others say he was silenced. That is the reality of the Medellin cartel. You are only useful as long as you are invisible. The 10 tons of cash were eventually moved into caletas, the hidden walls and jungle pits that became the cartel's new banking system. But that cash had a smell. It smelled of jet fuel and desperation. Pablo continued to grow his fleet, but he never forgot the Learjet. It was the moment he realized that money isn't just power, it is a target. The more you have, the larger the target becomes. The story of the cash jet reminds us that greed has a ceiling. Even a Learjet can only carry so much weight before it falls from the sky. Pablo pushed that limit every day until there was nowhere left to fly. The final irony is that years later, local villagers found the wreckage of one of the support planes. They didn't find gold. They found empty rubber bands and the smell of rotted linen. The wealth had vanished, leaving only the metal behind. This was the peak of the narco era, a time when a jet was a suitcase and the jungle was a vault. It was a time that could never last. In the end, power always comes with a price. If you like this video, make sure you subscribe and follow the channel. We upload new videos every single day. And trust me, the next story is even more intense, more surprising, and something you definitely don't want to miss. I'll see you in the next one.